The camera footage begins with low laughter, the hum of silverware, and a faint echo of jazz filtering through the room. 4 figures sit around a polished oak table, their faces softened by the amber light of a chandelier. Each Sunday dinner looked like this, predictable, polished, and perfectly staged. Then, in a single frame, it fractures. Richard Hale's smile freezes mid-toast. His hand trembles slightly, glass raised. 3 others mirror the gesture. The next second, the image blurs, then stops. When first responders arrived at the Hale residence at 8:47 p.m., they found the patriarch collapsed beneath the table, the stem of his wineglass broken near his right hand. Martha Hale was pacing. Clara, their daughter, was on the phone. Evan, the youngest, was still holding his camera, its red light blinking as if waiting for an ending that never recorded. At first glance, it appeared to be a sudden cardiac arrest. The body showed no external trauma, and rigor had not yet set in. But something in the scene resisted the simplicity of that conclusion. The wine bottle stood unopened beside a half-empty decanter. Investigators noted its placement, slightly off-center, droplets of condensation running down its neck. Martha mentioned that Richard had insisted on bringing it himself, a 2015 Bordeaux, his lucky bottle. Clara admitted she poured it but couldn't remember who received which glass. Evan's footage, when examined, cut off exactly 5 seconds before Richard's collapse. A mechanical failure, he said, yet the timing aligned too perfectly with the death itself. At 10:12 p.m., the coroner recorded a preliminary cause, possible myocardial infarction. Blood work was ordered. Meanwhile, the kitchen sink was running hot water. Martha had begun washing the dishes even before the paramedics arrived, explaining it was instinct, something to do with my hands. That act, trivial at first, would later obstruct trace collection, soap residues, temperature shifts, dilution of potential toxins. In domestic crime scenes, water is rarely innocent. At 11:03 p.m., the evidence team collected the remaining glasses. 3 were neatly placed beside the sink, 1 shattered on the floor. The fragments were bagged, labeled, and sent for analysis. A microfilm of reddish residue clung to the rim of Richard's glass, barely visible without magnification. Under UV inspection, it refracted light differently than the others, an early anomaly, catalogued but unexplained. By dawn, the family's narrative began to diverge. Martha claimed Richard looked unwell before dinner. Clara said he was strangely cheerful, almost rehearsed. Evan mentioned that his father had been distracted, checking his watch repeatedly. Yet in all accounts, the toast marked the moment of transition, from harmony to silence. That moment became the central timestamp in every subsequent report. 8:43 p.m. Around that time, temperature logs from the home's smart system registered a spike in the dining area, possibly from the chandelier, possibly from movement. It lasted only 27 seconds. A brief, measurable burst of heat just before the camera froze. The system captured no sound beyond the initial laughter and a short gasp. Investigators could not determine whose it was. Later in the forensic lab, the tox screen would reveal traces of a synthetic compound, non-lethal in minute doses, fatal in higher concentration. Its presence in Richard's bloodstream contradicted the diagnosis of cardiac failure. The discovery transformed the case from medical incident to criminal inquiry. The family of 3 became immediate subjects of interest. At the same time, inconsistencies in behavior began to accumulate. Martha's hands showed faint chemical irritation, consistent with recent contact with cleaning agents stronger than household detergent. Clara's fingerprints were on every glass except her father's broken one. Evan's camera battery was intact. The footage stopped not from malfunction, but from manual interruption. A human choice made in the seconds before collapse. The autopsy report later noted a peculiar detail. The concentration of toxin matched a dilution that could only have been introduced through liquid already separated from the main source, meaning the poison was not in the decanter, but in one glass. Richards. This led investigators to reconstruct the sequence precisely. The bottle arrives, brought by Richard. Clara opens it as she always does, demonstrating her expertise. She pours for her mother, then her brother, then herself, finally filling her father's glass. But something altered the routine. Richard insisted on switching seats to face the window. That subtle change forced an exchange of glass placement. No one remembered who moved which, only that the toast followed seconds later. At 8:43:12, Evan's camera caught the flicker of a smile on Richard's face. At 8:43:17, the image froze. Between those frames lay the gap that defined the rest of the investigation. The wine he brought to control the night's outcome would, unknowingly, dictate his own. In the lab's sterile white light, the liquid sample looked almost clear, odorless, inert. Yet under spectral analysis, it pulsed with faint chemical signatures. It wasn't an additive found in any commercial beverage. It was engineered. The perfect family dinner had turned into a forensic paradox. Poison in one glass, yet no one touched the bottle but him. Investigators returned to the Hale home 48 hours later. The table had been cleared. Martha's piano was still open to a sonata Richard disliked. On the mantel, an empty photo frame lay face down. The space no longer resembled a family's dining room. It felt like a stage after the actors had left, but before the lights went dark. When a family rehearses perfection long enough, can the performance itself become fatal? By the end of the first week, the case was officially reclassified. Homicide by ingestion, method undetermined. The glass that had frozen a smile became the first exhibit. The interrogation room was cold, intentionally so. Temperature manipulation kept subjects alert, talkative, slightly uncomfortable. Martha Hale sat straight-backed, hands folded, gaze unfocused. Her voice was even, calm, as she recounted the evening. Investigators noted no tremor, no hesitation. Yet when shown the still frame of Richard's last moment, the smile, the raised glass, her pupils contracted sharply. Autonomic response, involuntary, recorded. She maintained that the dinner had been peaceful. Richard opened the wine. Clara served. Evan filmed. She denied noticing anything unusual in the taste or aroma. When asked about the speed with which she began washing dishes, she answered, "I couldn't stand seeing the mess." Psychologically, the phrase revealed displacement, an instinct to remove contamination, literal or symbolic. But contamination of what? Guilt? Fear? Memory? Clara's interview, conducted 3 hours later, presented the opposite tone. Defensive, clipped, restless. She corrected every phrasing of the questions, emphasizing her sommelier background. Her expertise in identifying flavors, textures, subtleties. She insisted the wine had tasted clean, bright, slightly metallic. Metallic. The word stood out. Metallic flavors often indicate chemical interference. Investigators marked it with a red tag in the transcript margin. Evan's statement remained the most elusive. He claimed he turned off the camera because the battery indicator was flashing red. Later inspection disproved this. The battery was at 63%. He admitted editing the footage before submitting it, but denied removing anything relevant. His justification, "I didn't want to show my father like that," held emotional credibility, but not procedural sense. He had erased precisely the seconds that contained the collapse. That made him either deeply traumatized or deeply calculated. For every second missing on video, there existed a mirrored second in truth, something absent, yet measurable by what it erased. In the forensic lab, technicians continued refining the toxin analysis. It belonged to a class of synthetic alkaloids originally developed for agricultural research. Fast-acting, odorless, degrading quickly in oxygenated environments. The compound had no known domestic source. Its presence suggested acquisition through professional or black market channels. But only one family member had both access and knowledge: Clara through her restaurant's supply chains and wine imports. Still, a counterpoint emerged. Martha's bank records showed recent cash withdrawals inconsistent with her spending patterns. No clear destination. A separate discovery followed. A handwritten note in Richard's study, unfolded, smudged with wine stains. It contained a list of assets, divisions, and the unfinished line. If Martha continues to resist, proceed. The rest blurred into ink. The note dated the same week as his death. A secondary set of fingerprints surfaced on the wine bottle's neck. Richard's naturally, but also a partial print consistent with latex interference. Not Clara's, not Evan's, not Martha's bare skin. Someone had worn gloves briefly. The gloves themselves were never recovered. The timeline reconstruction grew more complex. Investigators charted the family's positions. Martha stood nearest the sink, back to the counter. Clara moved clockwise, serving in sequence. Evan remained behind the tripod. Richard, after switching seats, faced the window. That last adjustment altered the spatial geometry of the table. The bottle ended up on his left rather than his right. The switch forced Clara to reach across him to fill his glass. She might have brushed the rim, possibly transferred residue, or maybe avoided it altogether. The uncertainty became the hinge of the case. At 8:43, Shasha, the digital clock on Evan's recording, flashed once. The light reflected on the glass surface. Forensic enhancement revealed microbubbles in Richard's wine. Uneven. Isolated. Chemical reaction onset. They formed and disappeared in under 4 seconds. Poison dispersion at the molecular level. Not visible to the human eye, but definitive in retrospect. The poison didn't enter the family through conflict. It entered through ritual. The very act meant to unite them became the vector of dissolution. Martha's behavior after the death gained new context. Investigators replayed body cam footage. She was not panicking, but controlling, directing paramedics where to step, what to move, what to ignore. When the coroner bent down, she flinched, not from grief, but from calculation. The hot water in the sink was still running, steam fogging the kitchen window. Every trace washed away under that mist. Water removes residue, but it also reveals absence. The drain trap later contained minute fragments of red glass dust, traces of the shattered stem Richard had held. It was impossible for those fragments to reach the sink naturally. Someone had rinsed them intentionally. Evan's secondary footage, recovered from an SD backup, showed a blurred shot of the table seconds after the collapse. Martha's hand reached toward Richard's fallen glass. Her sleeve brushed the liquid, dragging a faint streak across the table's surface. That single frame reframed her entire account. She had touched the evidence before anyone else. Still, motive remained elusive. Forensic psychology profiling suggested Martha's primary drive wasn't hatred, but fatigue, a slow erosion of agency under years of control. Richard's reputation in corporate circles reinforced that narrative. Colleagues described him as domineering, methodical, incapable of surrender. The pattern aligned with psychological overcompensation, an individual whose need for dominance extended even into death planning. Investigators retrieved an external hard drive from Richard's office, encrypted but not beyond reach. Decrypted files revealed drafts of a revised will dated the day before the dinner. The distribution favored a trust in his name, excluding Martha as a primary beneficiary. It would have become effective only if she predeceased him. Suddenly, the motive inverted. The death benefited her, Yes, but the plan benefited him more if she had been the one to die. The irony sharpened. What if the poison wasn't meant to silence her voice, but her breath? The investigation turned inward. Evidence analysts reconstructed potential contamination paths, from the bottle to decanter to individual glasses. Simulation software indicated the poison could not have reached only one glass unless added after pouring. That meant someone had handled Richard's portions separately. According to all accounts, that someone was Richard himself. He adjusted his glass moments before the toast. Yet psychological conditioning often blinds perpetrators to symmetry. He never accounted for seat changes or reflections. One misalignment, one mirrored gesture, and control dissolves. If a man designs his wife's death with surgical precision, but miscalculates a single reflection in the glass, is the outcome murder or consequence? By the close of week 2, the case file read, "Suspected self-administration through misidentification of target vessel. Further inquiry required." But the narrative still held gaps. Tiny, silent spaces between words and evidence. Spaces where family loyalty might have whispered something else entirely. The lab's silence had a density of its own. Refrigerated drawers hummed softly while fluorescence traced the outline of numbered evidence bags. Richard Hale's blood sample, tagged RH03A, lay beneath the glass. The analysis was complete, the data irrefutable. The substance responsible for cardiac paralysis had been ingested, not inhaled or absorbed. It had entered through the wine but not from the bottle. Forensic chemists reconstructed the molecular structure of the toxin. It bore the signature of a compound once used in industrial pest control, later banned for neurological side effects. The molecule degraded within 40 minutes of exposure to oxygen, making it almost undetectable after death. Yet traces persisted in the crystalline residue found on the rim of Richard's glass. It was the kind of poison that required precision, patience, and intent. Detectives re-examined the scene photographs, overlaying them with timestamps from the footage. Something subtle emerged, a faint reflection on the wine's surface. 2 hands, not one, near Richard's glass. One belonged to him. The other, smaller, slender, appeared for less than half a second before vanishing. The timestamp matched the moment he shifted seats. When confronted, Clara identified it immediately. "That's me," she said. "I moved the glass so the camera wouldn't catch the glare." Her tone was controlled, but her pulse betrayed agitation. Investigators noticed she used the past tense instinctively. Wouldn't, not doesn't. Language drift often signals rehearsal. Meanwhile, the digital forensics team decrypted fragments from Evans' deleted footage. The restored frames showed nothing overtly incriminating, yet the ambient sound captured a whisper, indistinct, low but rhythmic, like a countdown masked in casual speech. A voice, likely Richard's, murmured something about freedom and a new start. At the same time, Martha's behavior outside interviews shifted. Surveillance footage from her piano studio showed her seated before the instrument late at night, playing a single dissonant chord repeatedly. In each session, she stopped at the same measure, closed the lid, and stared at her hands. Investigators began considering a pattern of post-traumatic ritual, a method of control mirroring her husband's own habits. Control had been the Hale family's hidden language. Each of them mastered it, and each became its prisoner. The forensic psychiatrist assigned to the case reviewed the interviews side by side. Richard's tone in past recordings, retrieved from work seminars, was authoritative, almost performative. Martha's voice carried suppressed compliance. Clara's answers oscillated between competence and defensiveness. Evans' responses were detached, analytical, as if watching a documentary rather than describing his father's death. The family dynamic, under analytical coding, resembled a closed system, self-regulating until one variable failed. Every controlled environment eventually turns toxic. The question is, who notices the fumes first? Pattern correlations linked Richard's financial movements with the timing of the dinner. 2 wire transfers, each under $9,000, were sent to an account registered under a defunct import company, believed to be a front for chemical acquisition. Investigators traced the IP address to Richard's office network. There was no evidence that Martha or the children accessed it. But an unexpected discovery emerged: fingerprints on the interior cork of the bottle. Impossible under normal circumstances unless someone had removed and reinserted it manually. The print did not match Richard's. Partial match. Female, but inconclusive. The database could not isolate between Martha and Clara due to overlap. The cork, porous and contaminated with wine, refused precision. The bottle that carried the poison had been both weapon and witness, and like all witnesses, it blurred under pressure. A second lab report introduced another anomaly: microscopic fibers embedded in the cork threads. Synthetic, elastic, beige. Gloves. Someone handled the bottle twice, once to open, once to reseal. Yet Richard had presented it as untouched. That contradiction cracked the sequence open. The investigative team decided to reconstruct the dinner in a controlled environment. Each family member reenacted their actions using identical glasses, lighting, and seating. Clara's movements were deliberate, precise, professional. Martha hesitated before the final pour. Evan refused to film. When Richard's role was simulated using a stand-in, the physical choreography of the evening revealed the crucial mistake. When he switched seats, his left hand automatically reached for the glass positioned before him, the one originally intended for Martha. That moment, subtle and invisible, inverted victim and perpetrator in a single gesture. The simulation ended in silence. The room felt colder than the lab. Clara turned away. Martha's breathing became shallow. Evan stared at the mirrored surface of the table as though watching it replay. It was the kind of symmetry investigators rarely see, the exact alignment of intention and error. A man who weaponized trust undone by the ritual that defined him. Even with that revelation, the district attorney hesitated to close the case. Proving self-administration through accidental misidentification required both chemical evidence and psychological intent. The question shifted. Did Richard know the risk of his own glass being moved, or did someone else ensure it would be? In the weeks that followed, investigators found new material inside Richard's desk drawer. A sealed envelope addressed to M. Inside, a typed letter read, "By the time you drink to freedom, I will already have it." No signature. The ink matched the same model of printer found in his office. The letter's phrasing was chilling in its precision, past tense projected into the future, as if anticipating its own irony. Freedom, in this house, was always purchased in someone else's name. Forensic linguistics concluded the wording bore deliberate ambiguity, consistent with manipulation. It could be read as threat or confession, love note or epitaph. Context determined morality. Intent determined crime. If the hand that poured wasn't the one that poisoned, can guilt still linger in the glass? The answer, like the residue on the rim, refused to vanish completely. The coroner's final report arrived on a gray morning, stamped and sealed. Toxic concentration: 4.2 milligrams per liter. Lethal within 90 seconds of ingestion. Time of death: 8:43 p.m. Cause: respiratory paralysis induced by neurotoxic compound. The report added one more sentence, dry but definitive. Substance introduced post-decanter. It meant that somewhere between pouring and toasting, the wine had been altered. The family received the findings in separate interviews. Martha didn't flinch. Her expression was neutral, as if she had already accepted this outcome days ago. Clara crossed her arms, her nails biting into her sleeves. Evan asked for a copy of the full report, claiming he was documenting the truth. The detective didn't refuse. He wanted to see what Evan would do with it. Later that afternoon, Evan uploaded a new video to his private cloud folder, labeled Reconstruction Truth.move. The file showed his father's empty chair, the bottle in the same position, the 3 surviving family members seated in silence. No dialogue, just static hum and the slow burn of candlelight. It was not a confession, but a memorial disguised as evidence. In the background, the camera caught a glimpse of something reflective behind Martha. The kitchen sink, gleaming clean, like a mirror refusing to hold a face. Investigators froze the frame and enhanced it. In the reflection, for less than a second, Martha's hand rested on the counter, fingers curved as though gripping something invisible. That image joined the archive, unclassified but haunting. The prosecutor's office debated whether to file charges at all. Legally, if Richard poisoned the wine, his own death nullified intent. But morally, the picture was tangled. The family had known something was wrong long before the dinner, yet none had stopped the ritual. Sometimes the crime begins long before the poison, in the silence that makes it possible. A search warrant on Richard's office uncovered another layer. Beneath the floorboard, inside a locked metal box, investigators found a second bottle. Same vineyard, same year. Its cork bore faint scoring, as though a syringe had pierced it. The residue matched the toxin's chemical signature. There were also handwritten notes detailing dosage calculations, labeled Phase 2. The handwriting was Richard's. His initials appeared at the bottom of each page. He had rehearsed the method twice, but never accounted for human error or fate's indifference. Pattern analysis indicated that the toxin could only remain active for 1 hour after insertion. He had chosen that timing precisely, ensuring it would act during dinner, ensuring he could watch its effect. Control to the last breath. But his plan depended on predictability, and families rarely move like equations. That discovery should have ended the case. Yet, inconsistencies persisted. The syringe referenced in his notes was never found. The second bottle's cork showed fresh fiber imprints, consistent with handling after his death. Someone had opened the hiding place. Someone knew where to look. Investigators turned to Martha again. Her alibi for the 48 hours following the incident was inconsistent. She claimed to be with Clara, but Clara's phone GPS placed her across town. When confronted, Martha exhaled slowly and said only, "I needed to know if he'd done it again." The phrasing, "done it again," suggested familiarity. Investigators revisited old medical records and found an incident from 3 years prior. Mild poisoning, diagnosed as food contamination, affecting only Martha. The dinner was not the first rehearsal of death in the Hale household, only the last. Evan's behavior shifted too. He stopped responding to calls from investigators, withdrew from classes, and deleted all his social media accounts. A wellness check found his apartment dark, walls covered in printed stills from his own videos. Each frame labeled with timestamps and single words: truth, guilt, control, freedom. At the center of the room, his father's voice played on loop from an old voicemail. "Every family needs order, Evan. Remember that." The line between documentation and obsession had dissolved. Evidence had become inheritance. The final toxicology supplement revealed that the concentration in Richard's bloodstream exceeded what was measured in the glass residue. A secondary dose, possibly ingested earlier. Investigators theorized he might have tested the compound before dinner, ensuring potency. If true, he had begun dying before he even raised the glass. Clara, summoned again, refused further cooperation. Her attorney described her as exhausted, grieving, and unwilling to relive the trauma. Yet her final words to investigators before leaving the precinct lingered in the report. "He thought the wine was his weapon. He never realized we stopped drinking his kind of poison years ago." In that statement lay both defiance and eulogy, a confession without a crime. Forensics closed the file provisionally. Death ruled as self-administered poisoning, motive undetermined. But the detectives who worked the case continued to meet off-record, sharing a silent discomfort. The evidence proved intent, yet the narrative resisted closure. If justice is the pursuit of truth, what happens when the truth poisons itself before reaching the glass? Late that night, the lead investigator returned to the dining room. The family had moved out. The house stood empty. He turned on the chandelier. Light reflected on the floor where the table once stood, revealing a pale ring, faint, circular, perfectly aligned with where the wine bottle had rested. Even when the crime ends, its geometry remains. Evidence rarely lies, but language does. Reports flatten emotion, photographs erase movement, and the word family loses its warmth when written in ink. In the Hale investigation, clarity had become its own mirage. Every discovery revealed another distortion. Weeks after the official closure, an anonymous envelope arrived at the forensic unit. Inside, a memory card. No sender, no message. The footage dated 2 days before the fatal dinner. It showed Richard in his study, seated before his desk, wine bottle visible in frame. He measured liquid into a glass cylinder, consulting handwritten notes. He spoke to the camera as if addressing someone unseen, a rehearsal meant for an audience that would never exist. His tone was steady. Precision is power. The footage shifted, showing him pouring the liquid back into the bottle, sealing it carefully, then wiping the cork with a cloth. In the reflection of the office window, another figure appeared. Female, blurred, standing at the doorway. The timestamp placed the moment minutes before the video ended. The silhouette matched Martha's posture. She had seen everything. That image transformed the case from tragedy to paradox. Her silence afterward was no longer ignorance, but endurance. She had allowed the ritual to unfold, knowing the danger, perhaps trusting inevitability to finish what she couldn't. Sometimes justice is not pursued through law, but through stillness, a refusal to interrupt fate. Forensic technicians enhanced the final frame of that video. On the desk, next to Richard's papers, lay a second glass already filled. He had not been drinking alone. Only one set of fingerprints appeared on it. Martha's. Yet the liquid inside contained no poison. Investigators revisited her earlier statement. "He looked unwell before dinner." The phrasing implied anticipation, not surprise. Each interview now read differently, every pause reinterpreted as calculation, every calm gesture as survival. Truth, when re-examined, becomes a living organism. It shifts, regenerates, resists containment. Clara, upon learning about the new footage, refused to watch it. She told detectives that her mother had once said, "The safest way to win with your father is to let him believe he's winning." That line became an unofficial thesis for the case file. Lab technicians compared residue from the study's desk to that found on the wine glass. The molecular breakdown revealed microtraces of glycerin, a stabilizer used to delay chemical reaction. Someone had diluted the poison slightly before dinner. The act extended the compound's activation window. Enough for Richard to deliver his toast, enough for irony to complete the story. That stabilizer was found only in Martha's home cleaning cabinet. It was domestic, innocuous, and invisible. No court would treat that as evidence of manipulation. Yet the timeline fit perfectly. She had access, motive, and perhaps the quietest form of intent. letting inevitability unfold under a thin layer of household normalcy. There are murders committed with silence sharper than any weapon. Evan's disappearance deepened the unease. His camera, recovered from the apartment, contained one final clip. The lens aimed at an empty dining chair, a faint reflection of his face visible in the glass behind it. His voice, low and unsteady. "Every story ends where it begins." Then the image cut to black. Investigators could not determine when it was recorded. The district attorney declined reopening the case, citing insufficient evidence of external interference. But within the forensics team, doubt lingered. Not about guilt, but about definition. Could omission be an act of control equal to poisoning? Could allowing death be a final retaliation after decades of suppression? Control had been Richard's creed, yet in the end, it was taken from him not by rebellion, but by patience. The Hale residence was sold 3 months later. During the final property inspection, the realtor reported an odd smell, faint sweetness near the baseboards of the dining room. The cleaning team found nothing. Chemical tests revealed trace vapor of residual compound, absorbed into the wood grain. Invisible, diluted, but persistent. Poison fades from blood faster than from memory. Question to the audience: when does survival stop being passive? When one watches a death, or when one decides not to stop it? The file, now archived, carried a single handwritten note from the lead investigator. No further findings, but something still breathes beneath the evidence. Every pattern in this case ends the same way, with absence filling the space where truth should be. Autumn bled into winter. The Hale case had been boxed, sealed, archived, yet it refused to settle. Investigators described it as residual static, a hum beneath closed evidence. Even without new leads, small irregularities persisted. Digital files that would not delete, photos that reappeared after removal, the sense that someone kept re-entering the system. An internal audit traced the logins to an unregistered device accessing the database remotely at irregular hours. The IP bounced through public networks, but one trace connected briefly to the Wi-Fi of a piano studio, Martha's. She denied involvement. Her lawyer framed it as coincidence, a client returning to normal life. Still, metadata showed the file opened multiple times, the same file that contained her own interview transcript. It was as if she needed to reread her own alibi, confirming it still held. Meanwhile, Clara left her job at the restaurant, severed contact with colleagues, and began traveling between cities. Credit records showed purchases of aged red wines, all from the same vineyard as the fatal bottle. Investigators couldn't prove intent, but the repetition suggested ritual. Some people revisit trauma not to heal it, but to rehearse its shape until it becomes familiar again. Evan remained missing. His absence had begun to feel like another form of evidence, something deliberately carved out of the narrative. But one evening, a courier delivered an envelope to the precinct. No return address, just a small USB drive and a handwritten label, 843 forever. The file contained still images, one every second, spanning exactly 7 minutes. Each frame displayed the empty dining room, perfectly still, the clock visible on the far wall. At 8:43, the chandelier flickered. A faint blur appeared under the table, a shadow shaped like a body lowering to the floor. The recording was impossible. The house had been empty for months. Technicians confirmed metadata authenticity. The footage had been captured by a device connected to the Hale home's original security system, deactivated after the sale. Whoever sent it had restored the connection remotely, only to document the echo of an event that no longer existed. The blur might have been digital interference, a trick of compression, but investigators who watched it described something else: the impression of repetition, a looped performance replaying itself within the structure of light. Some crimes refuse to die because someone keeps remembering them in real time. An archivist reviewing Richard's corporate email discovered drafts never sent. Hidden among financial statements was a message addressed to himself, unsent and dated 1 week before his death. She knows, but so do I. There is symmetry in the end. The signature line contained no name, only the phrase, "Order restored." The wording mirrored the inscription carved inside his wedding ring, recovered from evidence storage. Investigators cleaned it, and beneath the engraving found a hairline scratch. Microscopic, deliberate. When magnified, it formed a single letter, M. It could have been coincidence, or a mark left intentionally before the ring was returned to his hand that night. Either way, the body carried more messages than the man ever intended to send. Martha's health began to deteriorate quietly. Hospital records noted insomnia, tremors, and loss of coordination, symptoms consistent with long-term exposure to low doses of neurotoxins. Forensic chemists revisited early samples taken from her bloodstream. Traces of the same compound appeared there, though in quantities too small to be fatal. Exposure must have occurred gradually, possibly during repeated handling of contaminated glassware. Even survivors inhale the dust of the crimes they endure. During a final interview, Martha spoke softly, her voice stripped of all rhythm. "He thought control was immortality," she said. "But he never learned that control decays like everything else." She paused, eyes drifting toward the recorder on the table. "Do you know what happens to a reflection when the light stops?" The question hung unanswered as she signed the statement and left. Clara's trail ended in Montreal 6 months later. She rented a small apartment overlooking the river, neighbors reporting the same ritual each Sunday evening. A single glass of wine, raised in silence, then poured down the sink. When asked, she told the landlord it was for someone who finally learned how to stop. The act of erasing can become its own memorial. The lead investigator revisited the dining room one last time. The new owners had repainted, replaced the chandelier, removed the table. Still, a faint circular mark remained on the floorboards, too deep to sand away. He crouched, tracing it with his hand. Beneath the surface, the pattern of absorption was visible. Concentric, organic, like the ripple of something dropped into water long ago that had never stopped spreading. Every crime leaves behind a shape, even after its meaning fades. He wrote his closing note that evening. Poison is not always swallowed. Sometimes it's inherited. When silence becomes the only language left, who is still speaking? The living, or what they remember? Winter receded slowly that year, leaving Portland washed pale beneath constant rain. Officially, the Hale case remained closed, yet its evidence file kept migrating across departments. Each transfer request cited cross-reference, system audit, classification check. None of those terms meant what they said. The file was being studied not for justice, but for pattern. A forensic analyst named Harper noticed the recurrence of timestamps. Every document, every recording, carried the same embedded metadata sequence. 2043, or even unrelated backups adopted that signature. Harper ran a diagnostic. The number wasn't a system glitch. It had been manually inserted, line by line, across hundreds of entries. The case had started to rewrite itself to remember the exact second of death. When questioned, the digital archivist admitted curiosity. "It helps keep the chronology intact," he said, though the practice was unauthorized. He'd been adding the timestamp each time he opened a file, believing it preserved integrity. The effect, however, created a recursive loop. The more the files were opened, the more they echoed the same instant. Sometimes preservation becomes another form of haunting. Clara's name resurfaced through customs reports. Shipments of Bordeaux arriving under her restaurant's former supplier license. The imports were legal, but the quantities too small for resale, too large for collection. Each bottle registered to the same lot number as her father's wine. The supplier, contacted by investigators, confirmed she'd requested unfiltered vintages for personal study. The phrase struck Harper, personal study, as if she were examining a specimen rather than a memory. He requested a sample from customs. Laboratory analysis found the bottles untouched, corks sealed, yet their internal oxygen levels slightly lower than expected. Pressure variance suggested extraction, minute but deliberate, as though a syringe had drawn liquid and resealed the cork. Whatever Clara was studying, she was repeating her father's method, but without victims, only ghosts. Martha's condition worsened. Neurological decline accelerated. Tremors advanced into full motor failure. The hospital listed environmental toxicity as a factor, but not cause. Nurses reported she refused sedatives, insisting on remaining lucid. In her final coherent days, she asked to hear piano recordings of her own performances, then demanded they be deleted immediately after playback. She died 2 weeks later at precisely 8:43 p.m. The pattern had claimed its final symmetry. Harper attended the cremation as observer, not relative, yet the moment the furnace engaged, power in the building flickered. Security footage later showed the timestamp freezing at 8:43 shakes for exactly 5 seconds before resuming. The anomaly matched the same digital glitch that haunted the archives. By spring, Clara returned to Portland quietly. She visited the cemetery once, left no flowers, only a cork placed on the headstone. She stood there for exactly 1 minute, then walked away. Investigators monitoring her movements noted precision in her timing, identical to the rhythm of the dinner recording. Evan reappeared unexpectedly. Airport cameras captured him disembarking from a red-eye flight from Montreal. Alone, thinner, hair unkempt, carrying nothing but a camera case. He approached the precinct voluntarily, requesting access to the archived footage. His statement was brief. "I want to finish the film." He spoke as if it were still an active project. Permission was denied. Hours later, he uploaded a short clip online, black screen, audio only. A woman's voice whispered, "He drank first." The upload vanished after 3 minutes, erased by its own poster. Truth had become self-destructive code, appearing only long enough to erase itself. The case gained new classification: psychological contagion risk. Analysts believed continuous exposure to its imagery produced temporal fixation, a subtle synchronization of human attention to one immutable moment. Staff who reviewed it extensively reported recurring dreams of toasts and chandeliers, each ending with the same collapse. Harper, now lead archivist, documented these effects clinically. But one night, while re-indexing files, he noticed moisture rings forming on the metal desk. Circular, faint, perfectly symmetrical. He wiped them away, yet they reappeared seconds later. The air in the room carried a faint sweetness, like aged wine evaporating. Evidence has no scent, but memory does. He stopped working after that, leaving a final note in the system. The residue persists beyond containment. Recommend permanent closure. Question to the audience: if data can inherit obsession, can guilt survive inside a machine? The Hale archive was encrypted, sealed under judicial order, access prohibited for 20 years. Still, the internal clock inside the system log continued to reset itself nightly. To 8:43, without human command. Some stories refuse ending because ending requires silence, and silence was never part of their design. Rain returned with precision, as if following its own forensic protocol. By now, the Hale case had become less a file and more a contagion. A rhythm circulating through digital, biological, and psychological residue. The city's forensic network experienced intermittent errors at exactly the same hour each night. Screens freezing, timestamps flickering to 8:43, fragments of corrupted video appearing for seconds before dissolving. Most dismissed it as coincidence. Harper didn't. He had stopped sleeping. The sound of liquid pouring haunted him. Steady, measured, always ending with silence. During his final audit, he connected to the encrypted archive one last time. The interface glitched, and a familiar image appeared. The Hale dining room restored in perfect digital detail. No lights, no figures, only the table and 4 glasses. A system error, perhaps, or something pulled from a corrupted frame. But as he leaned closer, one glass trembled slightly, displaced by no visible force. It moved exactly enough to change who would have died. Harper's breathing quickened. He recorded a screen capture, printed the still, and compared it with official evidence photographs. The alignment was identical, down to the angle of the glass stems. The only difference lay in the reflection on the polished surface. Where Richard's face should have appeared, there was only darkness. He documented the anomaly, labeled it Echo Artifact, and marked it for deletion. The system refused to comply. Data has no will, yet it remembers the shape of intention. Meanwhile, Clara resurfaced again. She'd opened a wine boutique in Seattle, specializing in vintage preservation. Her advertising featured a minimalist logo, a single clock face set permanently to 8:43. When interviewed by local media, she described it as the hour when time paused and clarity began. The phrase spread online, romanticized, stripped of context. The store's launch video used ambient audio lifted directly from Evan's last upload. Even grief can be distilled into branding when distance sanitizes memory. Investigators still monitoring the sealed archive noticed new data packets entering the folder from unknown sources. Embedded metadata traced back to public IPs near the boutique. Within each file, subtle distortions of the same frame appeared. The wine glasses slightly closer, the chandelier dimmer, the reflections shifting incrementally toward the viewer. None of this was possible under the system's closed encryption. Harper decided to isolate the archive physically. He transferred the data to an offline drive, sealed it in evidence storage, and deactivated network access. The moment the disconnection finalized, lights in the room flickered. His monitor displayed a single line before shutting off. Order restored. The phrase repeated once before the system went dark. Weeks later, Harper's body was found in his apartment. No sign of struggle, a half-filled glass beside the desk. Toxicology revealed no poison. The liquid was distilled water. Still, the report noted an unexplained scent of fermented fruit lingering in the air. On his computer screen remained the same still frame from the archive. The Hale table, perfectly set. Some obsessions kill not by ingestion, but by replication. Evan appeared at Harper's funeral, standing at the back, filming silently. When approached by reporters, he said nothing, but his camera lens captured the reflection of Harper's casket in the chapel's polished floor, an image nearly identical to the shot of his father beneath the table. The symmetry was impossible to ignore. After the service, he disappeared again. In the months following, fragments of an unfinished documentary began circulating on obscure forums. The footage combined real evidence with reenactments, indistinguishable in tone. Its final title card read simply, "The Brindisi Sequence." The uploader's identity was anonymous, but the metadata contained a familiar tag, 843. Authorities ordered takedowns, but each removal prompted 3 new uploads. The narrative kept rewriting itself through different users, languages, and edits. No one owned it. Everyone reproduced it. The Hale dinner had become a digital myth, repeating itself through the very networks meant to contain it. Question to the audience: When a crime becomes immortalized by replication, does it still belong to the guilty, or to those who can't stop watching? A final internal memo circulated through the Bureau. Cease review. File closed. System compromised. Yet the encrypted drive, sealed months earlier, continued to emit faint mechanical noise during nightly security rounds. The soft click of playback repeating every 24 hours at 8:43 sharp. Memory has its own metabolism, and some truths refuse to decompose. By spring, the Hale file had become something else. Not an investigation, not a story, but a pattern in motion. Each time someone attempted to shut it down, another fragment emerged, like cells dividing under invisible instruction. The Bureau stopped tracing the leaks. Servers overloaded, backups multiplied autonomously. Still at the center of everything, one image persisted. 4 glasses, 1 chandelier, 1 second stretched beyond time. Harper's replacement, a data specialist named Lynn, inherited the sealed archive. She had been warned. Never open the drive, never interact with external networks, never run playback. She obeyed for 3 weeks. Then one night, curiosity won over caution. The drive activated itself at 8:42:58. Her monitors flickered. The same dining room appeared, rendered now in higher clarity than any file should allow. Lynn froze. The table looked recently cleaned, yet condensation traced 4 fresh fingerprints on the glass stems. Her own. She shut down the system, pulled the cables, but the screen remained lit. The camera angle began to shift, as though someone else inside the recording was moving toward the lens. The file name changed by itself. Witness, continuation. The recording stopped at 8:43 exactly. When the system finally went dark, Lynn noticed the faint taste of metal in her mouth. The next morning, her report was clinical. The data is self-perpetuating through observation. No emotion, no elaboration. She requested transfer to another division. Before leaving, she left a handwritten note pinned to the server door. It records, "Because we keep watching." Observation had become participation. The moment anyone looked, the crime rewrote itself to include them. Meanwhile, Clara's boutique flourished. Critics described it as a sensory experience in nostalgia. The store layout mimicked a dining room. 4 seats, 4 glasses, perpetual music in minor chords. Customers claimed the temperature always shifted at the same time every evening. At 8:43, the lights dimmed slightly, as if honoring a ritual. Clara called it coincidence, but her employees noticed she always stepped away right before the change. Evan returned one final time. Surveillance from a nearby street showed him entering the boutique after closing hours, camera in hand. He stayed for 17 minutes. No one saw him leave. The following morning, staff found the front door unlocked, a single glass filled halfway, and a camera on the counter. Lens pointed at the clock, fixed on 8:43. The footage captured nothing but the empty chairs and faint echo of footsteps. Sometimes silence finishes what truth cannot. Digital forensic teams seized the boutique's security drives. Every recording from that night was corrupted, except one. The recovered segment lasted 43 seconds. In it, a man's reflection appeared in the window, raising a glass toward the lens, smiling faintly. His features were indistinct, but the posture mirrored Richard Hale's final frame exactly. The system timestamp showed current date, not archival footage. Experts debated whether it was a deepfake, a glitch, or an intentional insertion. But the camera used had no internet access, no modification software. Whatever it was, it proved that some images do not need permission to return. Investigators revisited Clara for questioning. She answered quietly, almost tenderly. "Maybe you're all looking in the wrong direction," she said. "He wanted to be remembered, that's all, And now he is. When asked if she'd seen her brother that night, she hesitated. Maybe. Or maybe he finally joined the story. Her words lingered like condensation. Shapeless, evaporating, but traceable. The Bureau declared the entire case file classified. Access revoked, data containment moved to a physical vault. Yet the servers outside official jurisdiction, anonymous, global, continued to host fragments of the Brindisi sequence. New uploads showed extended footage, impossible angles, perspectives from inside the glasses themselves, each refracting the moment of collapse in slow motion. Viewers reported nausea, headaches, blurred vision. Doctors dismissed it as psychosomatic. But poison doesn't always enter through the mouth. Sometimes it's absorbed through sight. At the final briefing, Lynn, pale and exhausted, presented her conclusion. "The case isn't haunting us," she said. "We're haunting it. Every time we reconstruct, rewatch or retell, we reactivate its sequence. It survives through repetition." Her superior asked if deletion could stop it. She replied simply, "Only if no one remembers. And that's impossible now." Question to the audience. When knowledge itself becomes contamination, how does one investigate without inheriting the crime? That evening, Lynn disconnected the last active server. The lights flickered once more, then stabilized. For a moment, the system was silent. But at exactly 8:43 p.m., the speakers emitted a soft, unmistakable sound. The clink of glass against glass. Every ending is just another toast, waiting to be replayed. Night settled over Portland like residue, faint and invisible, yet chemically active. The Bureau's vault lay beneath reinforced concrete, climate-controlled, sealed from network access, the official grave of the Hale case. Inside, the offline drive rested within a transparent casing, temperature constant at 20 degrees, humidity 40%. The archivist's log recorded daily stability checks. None mentioned the sound that began 3 nights later. A faint vibration, rhythmic, every 24 hours at 8:43 p.m. The technician on duty, Alan Voss, described it as a hum, followed by the subtle click of glass against glass. He filed a report, which no one read until days later. The sound continued, sometimes accompanied by what he thought was static feedback, though no speakers were active. He stopped checking after the 5th occurrence. The next morning, he resigned without notice. Even silence develops an echo when played too many times. The director ordered the drive permanently destroyed. A small team gathered in the vault. Lynn among them returned temporarily for final oversight. She kept her distance, eyes fixed on the transparent casing as a technician prepared to disassemble the housing. The process was methodical. Disconnect power, remove shielding, extract storage unit. Nothing unusual occurred until the moment of final disconnection. The lights dimmed. The system clock, entirely offline, glowed briefly. 8:43 A's. A sharp crack followed, not mechanical, not digital, but acoustic. 4 distinct tones, resonant, like glasses striking in perfect unison. The technician froze. The noise ceased instantly. The drive ejected itself from the housing, screenless, inert. Yet every monitoring device in the room displayed the same new file name. Last Toast. Lynn insisted on examining it. Against protocol, she connected the drive to an isolated laptop. The file opened without input. The image appeared. The Hale dining room reconstructed again, this time empty except for a single object in the center. The wine bottle. No glasses. The chandelier flickered once, then steadied. On the bottle's label, a reflection formed. Impossible in that lighting. A man's face, eyes half closed, smiling faintly. Richard Hale, unchanged by time or consequence. He had found a way to exist where evidence and memory converged. The reflection moved. His lips parted, though no sound came. Instead, the room itself began to vibrate, faint resonance building through frequencies below hearing range. Lynn's screen distorted. Text replaced the image, a single phrase repeating endlessly. Freedom achieved through order. The laptop shut down on its own, screen dark. After that night, Lynn left the bureau permanently. No trace of her employment remained except one postscript note on her personnel file. Final statement pending. Do not reopen. A week later, Clara's boutique closed abruptly. Windows boarded, inventory removed. On the glass door, a handwritten sign in black ink. We have poured enough. Neighbors claimed to see lights flickering inside for several nights after closure, always around the same time. Evan's whereabouts were never confirmed. A file appeared anonymously on the Bureau's public evidence server months later. Its metadata matched his camera signature. The footage opened with black screen, then slowly brightened into a familiar image. The Hale table restored once more, 4 glasses filled, untouched. From behind the lens, his voice murmured, "Last frame." The camera moved closer, capturing the reflection of the photographer in the wine's surface. For the first time, the reflection was not him. It was Martha, smiling faintly, her hand resting over Richard's. The image dissolved in a burst of static before the timer reached 8:43. Authorities traced the upload to no verifiable source, yet each bureau system clock froze at the same timestamp immediately afterward. Every file within the archive renamed itself to the Brinde. Truth once digitized no longer belongs to the living. It circulates freely, indifferent to authorship. 6 months later, collectors began purchasing bootleg DVDs of the Brindisi sequence. Each disc bore identical corruption near the end, freezing on a frame of the 4 glasses mid-toast. No matter the copy, no matter the region, playback always stopped at 8:43. Consumers reported identical symptoms: dizziness, metallic taste, shortness of breath. Authorities called it coincidence. Scientists blamed suggestion. But the timestamp endured, immutable, precise. Some stories cease to be told and begin to tell themselves. If remembrance itself is poison, who dares to drink first? The Bureau eventually sealed the vault, welded its door, and reclassified the Hale investigation under a single phrase: archive closed. Contagion non-biological. No further study permitted. Still, once a year, at exactly the same time, the building's motion sensors register faint movement in the basement corridor. 4 heat signatures seated, facing one another across empty space. No one investigates. The lights flicker. A single tone hums through the concrete, delicate, crystalline. 4 glasses, 1 toast. Time locked forever at 8:43. Next case dismantles another perfect crime. Don't miss it.